Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We are back live and doing industry and academic partnership panel discussion. My name is Kristen Yeom. I am a Stanford AIMI faculty and a neuroradiologist. I've had many amazing opportunities to work with outstanding members from the industry and forge academic and research partnerships. And we have some outstanding panelists here today to give us some academic and industry perspectives on research and partnership. I'd like to introduce my co-moderator, Hugh Harvey.
Hello, I'm Hugh, a radiologist from the UK. I've worked in a couple of startups in the space and now consult for a lot of others around the world. So very excited about this panel today. Kristen, should we go introductions of everybody?
I think we should.
Great. Let's start with Melissa Davis from Emory University. Tell us about yourself. You've got about a minute.
Thank you. And I thank you for allowing me to be on this panel today. Really excited about this great group that I see in front of me. I'm a radiologist in the emergency and trauma imaging division at Emory University. I'm also neuroimaging trained. My role here is medical director of quality for the radiology department. And I spend a lot of that role looking at how we can implement new technologies into our system in order to make our workflows more efficient. I spent a little bit of time in industry working with Nines AI with some implementation and operations in their early stages. And I'm now an advisor for them, and I do a bit of consulting on the side as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Good to have you. Karley.
Sure. Hey, Hugh. Hey, Kristen. Thanks for having me on. I'm really excited to be engaging with folks today. My name is Karley Yoder. I am the Chief Digital Officer for Ultrasound at GE Healthcare. Before that role, I led artificial intelligence across GE Healthcare, so I feel pretty passionate about some of these topics, and if we get it right, the impact it can have for patients all over the world. I guess relevant for this panel, I did spend a summer working at the Lucas Center way back during my undergrad, where I didn't know enough to be helpful. So I mostly sat in MRI scanners, getting my brain scanned to move medicine forward. So thrilled to be here with you guys today.
Well, thanks, Karley. Over to you, Nish.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me today. My name is Nish. I was a student at Stanford before I started this company called Bunkerhill. We are a consortium that connects health systems together for AI-related collaborations. So for instance, instead of spending months, if not years, getting research and data sharing agreements signed, AI researchers can work with institutions in our consortium to train and validate their algorithms using our existing agreements, using our existing technical infrastructure. We then take those validated algorithms, file for regulatory clearances, and then commercialize them, all while sharing revenue with the AI researchers. I'm excited to be here. Thanks.
Thanks, Nish. Enhao.
Hi, everyone. This is Enhao Gong. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Syeda Medical. Syeda Medical is founded at around end of 2017. It's basically a lot based on my research together with several Stanford Radiology and AIMI professors at Stanford, and we licensed the research IP from Stanford. So for me, it's for sure a transition from academic research to industry to real production. At Syeda, we focus on upstream AI because we use AI to speed up radiology exam, enable faster, safer imaging, and we already have multiple FDA clearance and CE mark for two major products that enhance accelerate protocol to drive quality and efficiency. So we have been already in clinical usage in terms of customer in around 100 sites globally. So happy to share my perspective regarding radiology AI and the partnership.
Fantastic. Kenji from Microsoft.
Hi, great to be here. Especially I was actually born in San Francisco, so almost home. I'm a Microsoft researcher in Cambridge in the UK. Our organization really thinks several years out, 5, 50, 100 years out, and what the world might look like. I help facilitate academic collaborations. Our team does that globally, and I'm specifically focused around health and AI. So I've just done 10 years at Microsoft. Previous to that, I did 20 years as a faculty member at the University of Southampton in aeronautics and astronautics, where I set up various industry-funded research centers with Airbus and worked with Formula One teams. So I've kind of seen both sides. Not sure which side I'll end up on, but it's great to be here.
Good. And last but not least, Tanveer.
Hi, I'm Tanveer Syeda-Mahmood. I'm from IBM Research and an IBM Fellow and a Chief Scientist for the Medical Self Radiology Grand Challenge. And I was visiting a sabbatical at AIMI, and I work collaboratively with AIMI folks quite a bit as well. Background is maybe a long-term student of AI, I would say, over the last 40 years. And I've worked in different fields of AI and healthcare AI in the last 15, 20 years or so. So I'm here to talk about my own experiences and trials and tribulations of getting AI and from research to commercialization.
Well, thank you, everyone. That was really awesome discussion or introduction. So I think, just for sake of time, I'm going to just start diving into some of our hot topic items. And one of the questions folks are really interested to know is what the current status is on the prospective clinical AI studies and any potential associated hurdles or challenges. And I'd like to ask Nish to get the dialogue started, just because I know this has been something he's very interested in, and rest of you guys are welcome to just kind of join us on this discussion.
Yeah, thanks. When I was a student back at Stanford, we tried to organize a prospective randomized control trial for one of the algorithms we had built at Stanford. And it was really, really difficult to do so, not from a clinical standpoint, but more so from an administrative, technical, and legal standpoint. We did it in a multi-institutional setting. And so working between Stanford and other institutes in this clinical trial involved getting research agreements signed, data sharing agreements, working with the IT teams at each institute. And all of that meant that just setting up the clinical trial took a long time. I think those, in my opinion, are the biggest hurdles to getting started for a prospective clinical trial. From an industry standpoint, I think that timeline currently is longer than most startups' runway, which does not bode well for a lot of companies. And so a lot of my focus right now is trying to shorten that timeline to getting started on these prospective clinical trials.
Thank you. Melissa, have you guys had hurdles and challenges and from your institution at Emory?
Yeah, definitely. And I think, what Nish said, I think nail on the head right there. The biggest hurdles really are the administrative hurdles within the system and really trying to get through them. And so, we've brought in about 3 companies that we are looking at to help with solving operational problems at Emory over the last year. And a lot of that is, how do we get from saying, hey, we want to work with you guys, in order to, hey, let's actually start a pilot, or let's actually start a trial. And so when I joined, that quickly became one of my biggest frustrators. And so I've partnered with something at Emory called the Innovation Hub, which really looks at how do we implement these new technologies. And the core of what we're doing right now is looking at the process of going through an IT review, going through a legal review, going through finding a clinical champion, and seeing if we can actually streamline that process so to go from a 1 to 2 year process to a 6-month process.
Oh, that's really great to learn. And Enhao, I know you guys look at a lot of technical translational research. Have you thought about prospective studies also?
Yeah, I think for sure that's within the scope, and we have to keep working on it. And usually for our existing clinical deployment, some of them also involve like pilots, like to validate, because we can show with basically based on certain protocols, usually under ARB, we can go through it and to show the improved quality, to show improved efficiency. And I think right now the prospective study can still be a major issue, because it's for sure require more time and cost involvement for both sides. And I think mostly industry, what we show from regulatory side is we use the clinical data, but not the full-blown studies to really show similar effect. But I think the major question is not whether you do prospective or retrospective. It's really how to quantify the performance of AI algorithm, because there are a lot of different factors, and also you want sometimes a quantitative metrics, and so how to bridge from the algorithm performance to one or many like quantitative metrics, I think is a key for sure. And I think so far has been a lot of like attention in this area.
Oh, thank you, Enhao. And I guess, you know, I want to reach out to Tanveer and Karley and also Kenji. I mean, you guys are powerhouses from think tank technological perspectives. And what are you guys' thoughts on clinical prospective, you know, studies and trials and so on?
So I think in the instruction or agreements, most of the time we do say that it should not to be used for live clinical workflows and live practice, and it is for so even if we were to do a prospective study, it would have to be set up as a parallel workflow, so that you're not actually impacting the clinical workflow. So that makes the testing tricky to see what the value of it would be. For retrospective, we understand, you know, it's easier to show the value proposition, but for prospective, that is the case. So we were able to run once a study with an international hospital where we deployed a service in a test drive mode in the prospective setting, and we just cataloged. But this requires a lot of cooperation from the participant hospitals to sort of do the double work, if you will, because they have to test our system and continue with their current operations. So they would need a dedicated staff to run the parallel workflow. So that is one of the difficulties we have also encountered from research. Of course, when it goes into the commercial side of things, when we transfer the technology, they have their own processes and they are familiar with how to conduct reader studies and so on. So, you know, perhaps it is still difficult, and from all the 3 points that Nish mentioned is very much true. But I think from research, at least, this is one of the constraints we have to follow.
Mm-hmm.
And Kristen, I think just to add on to that, I mean, to address your earliest question, which is kind of what is the status today, it's nowhere close to where it needs to be. I mean, I saw a recent study focused on AI in the ICU, and it was kind of this graphical bubble chart of how many papers had been published looking at setting up a study, POC, regulatory, prospective clinical validation, and there was this massive cluster up on POC and a few tiny little dots down here in perspective. And the reality of AI is it's easy to train a model and get good results in kind of a retrospective look, but you have to run it in the wild and you have to run these prospective clinical trials. And I loved hearing what Nish and Melissa talked about, because I do think it is going to be a partnership between industry and academics that begins to lower some of these hurdles that were articulated well earlier in the panel. And I even think to the future of like what Tesla's doing with the autonomous car. They have created an ever-going perspective study, if you will, with the AI that they're running and the data that they're collecting. And if we think about the future of AI and how it needs to be not just one data type, but longitudinal, a full patient jacket, that has to happen in a prospective manner for both data collection and clinical validation. Otherwise, we're going to stop so short of the promise of AI. So I think this is a really important topic, and we're nowhere close to where we need to be as an industry.
I think that's true. And one of the things, you know, as Microsoft and Microsoft Research, you know, we work in all countries and everybody's hitting the same hurdles, right? And I think that the real opportunity is really for us to work together as industry, as academia, with the regulators. In the UK, you know, there's a lot of efforts as NHSX. They've just, you know, launched this AI award to try and get from the lab through retrospective, prospective, and then actual scalable procurement across the NHS. And so I think it's really interesting, different ways of doing it, and everyone's trying to tackle this problem. And I think, you know, just so much frustration with everybody that I think is one of those things where, you know, community effort, you know, true community effort is really required to kind of write this down and work together, synthesize it so that we can move together forward as community.
And you're going to wonder, what are we going to do with this information too? Like if we're prospectively rolling out these trials and it's informative, and the doctors, and how do they integrate that? And actually, what if it impacts the patient care? Do we use it, change it? Do we get patients' consent at the same time? There are a lot of, more hurdles the more we do this. And it'll be really interesting to see, like Melissa, or like everyone said, I mean, what do we do with this all new information, right? So So thank you. Those are really excellent discussion on this.
One thing that popped into my head as Karley was talking about this is that, typically in like pure clinical trials, we're really trialing patients. Like we're focused on the patient as the person that we're testing the subject matter on. In this case, we're actually trialing all of us, like the doctors, the staff, the administration, like all of us are like almost a part of this trial, like in that thought around how Tesla is doing this as a continuous rollout. And I think that that's actually a barrier to actually moving this forward, because we're not used to actually being tested on in this way in the medical field. We want to know that it works before I put it in my practice. And now we're asking people to put it in their practice and then tell us if it works or not.
That's right. That's right.
There's the liability aspect of downstream decision making and what AI says and trusting what AI says and acting upon it. And I think that is the fundamental issue, is how to address that liability aspect in a prospective trial. With retrospective, you have that cushion of even if you did the analysis and proved nobody actually acted on it. But so that's the case. If there's a way to do prospective trial without the downstream actual impact, or a way to prevent that securely, then maybe there'll be more freedom to do those in future.
That's great. And Hugh, any thoughts? And we can move on to next question or topic item.
Well, I agree with the sentiment of everyone, especially Karley, about saying we're not doing enough for prospective studies. I co-authored a meta-analysis last year where we looked at prospective studies of AI, and really there were very few, and the ones that we found were all biased. So new standards are coming out. There's new starred AIs coming out, tripod AI, there's Spirit and Consort AI. There's lots of new guidance about how to do these studies properly. But as we've all discussed here, prospective studies take a toll on everyone who's participating in them, and there is no set way accepted yet of how to do it. It's a little bit of a Wild West, and people are trying to figure it out. So I'm going to move on to the next question, which I think follows on very nicely. Apart from clinical evidence, what are the main barriers to actually getting something clinically deployed? Is it regulation? Is it health economics? Is it something else? Like, I would say, let's start with Enhao, because you've got a startup, maybe an SME definition now. What are the barriers to getting clinical deployment that you face from potential customers?
Yeah, so we have, as I mentioned, we have been have multiple programs and 2 products, and they're in clinical usage. The customer includes the biggest image enterprise, both in US and abroad. I think there are for sure several hurdles we have passed. And related to the question we discussed on prospective studies, I don't think like all the customers really need to do it, because it will take forever for everyone. But we do have some customers and partners who already do prospective and publish. For example, some one paper showed they can really reduce the dose. They really have the parallel, like prospective designed full dose and low dose as a partner in Europe. But I think the one thing is, for both this and the trial and maybe simpler trial, they all start with you have to spend more time to validate it, and that versus like the goal to save time, right? So, but I think several of our customer and partner really passionate and focus on this area because they believe the future improvement of quality and efficiency are top on their list. So they invest the time together, and usually they lead the projects to show the efficacy. And what also the tricky part is we are on the upstream side, so the goal is to improve the workflow and maybe protocols, but it will start with some changes of workflow and protocols. That has been, I think, will be always tricky within healthcare because the workflow has been set up in a certain way that it's not that easy to change. I think eventually it will be the quality and the value proposition of the quality efficiency gain that drive them to change their workflow and protocol for benefit for both the provider side and the patients. And I think from regulatory perspective, it is not a final endpoint. It's just an entrance and a starting bar for the company like us to really get into clinical adoptions. And so the clinical quality and the bar and the proven like value proposition of the ROI, I think is a major driver for customer to really use this clinically. And so I think we do have spend a lot of efforts to get to, say, right now around 100 sites, and there's for sure some companies I think has been deployed in like in tens of sites, 100 sites. So I think it's growing acceptance by the clinical side to really adopt the AI in clinical settings.
There's some very, very strong points there, that regulation is just that entrance to market. It's not the final proof point. I think we all agree that. And also what you say about having to pilot and validate, and that's what people expect. So Melissa, I assume that you've been doing some of these pilots of potentially commercial procurements down the line. Is that correct? And if so, where are you at with those?
Yeah, so I've been able to be involved in a couple of pilot projects for companies that are coming out of industry, both in this job as well as my prior job. I was at Yale University before this, and we did a big implementation for an AI company there. And I think that, what was stated before around, it's going to be the clinicians on the ground who are really interested in this in a way that it improves their workflows, but it also improves patient care. And so one of the issues that we always have when we're thinking about working with a new company is, one, is it going to make our workflows better or worse? And if the answer is worse, then it's not really going to work out. And the other is how is this going to impact patient care? And I like what Enhao said around, like, quality is really going to be the driver of implementation here going forward, because it really is, especially at Emory, it's our quality team meshed with our operations team that are saying, how do we make these processes better? Because when we think about AI, a lot of us talk about, how it's going to help us diagnose things and do stuff like that. But really it's about how is it going to change our process and make our process better. And so we've been able to work with a couple of companies in order to do that. But those are the initial conversations that we always have to have in order for us to say, is this going to make or break our implementation process?
And from an industry point of view, this extends your runway, increases your financial resource burden. So I was going to maybe go to Nish on that, because you help companies try, well, ostensibly to accelerate these processes or make them as efficient as possible. Is that correct?
Yeah, exactly. And I think the biggest bottleneck right now to clinical deployment really comes down to proving two conditions for your algorithms or your products. The first one is that it betters or sustains patient outcomes. And then the second, sort of the elephant in the room, especially in the case of US healthcare, is that it financially benefits a major stakeholder in healthcare, whether that's insurance companies or hospitals. And I think as long as your algorithm or product is able to prove out these two conditions, everything else sort of just falls into place. Like, you will have a champion at an institution who is willing to actually get it implemented at your institution. I've also never heard thus far from other startups and AI researchers where regulation was the biggest bottleneck. It's usually, as Enhao said, just the beginning rather than an end outcome. So I think I'm really focused right now on streamlining that process to prove out those two conditions. And I'm hopeful that that will lead to more algorithms being used in clinical deployment.
Yeah, excellent. Karley, do you have anything to add on that?
Sure. I love the three answers that were just given, because they all tie back to value. I can guarantee you, if this panel happened 3 years ago, we would have been talking about things like model generalizability, compute power to run an inference online. We would have been talking about all of these kind of technical and process barriers. And I think the shift in conversation is because we've solved some of those hygiene things, but also we as industry and academic partners have moved past the excitement over a technology and moved towards the so what's. And so I think the number one hurdle is value, it's the promise of value. Can you help Melissa provide the care to her patients faster than she could have done otherwise, right? And so I just think that's the number one hurdle, and everything else is kind of on a second tier.
Excellent.
I just want to add to that. Our experience in Cambridge, so we have Project Enhao as our open source medical imaging project, and we've been working with a number of hospitals and Addenbrooke's Hospital. And it's interesting that, you know, the main thing is patient benefit. You know, they're aiming to halve the time to treatment for cancer patients by reducing the segmentation time from hours to a few minutes. But then for clinicians, then it means they can save those hours and spend that time with the patients, and it also helps to reduce burnout. And then at a system level, just you know, literally just published was just this shocking shortage of radiation oncologists in the NHS. This massive you know, workforce shortage. So, you know, thinking about a patient benefit and a clinician benefit, and then the system-wide benefit. You know, if you can get all those three with an AI solution, you know, in our case, it's open source for other people to go and deploy. I think that's when you know you're kind of on the right track. And so I think it's really important to think, you know, very holistically about that.
Okay, great. Thanks, you guys. So I'm going to toss up the next topic, which I think is something that we encounter a lot for some of us in the academic setting, and of course our industry partners on the panel in this panel session. So the question is, who drives the academic industry research partnership? And I'd love to get Karley's thoughts on this, Melissa's thoughts on this, and everyone else, because I encounter the same questions, because sometimes I want to do project and I want it to be totally novel, never done before. And my industry partner might be interested in, clinical applicability, translational, you know, elements and so on. And so I'd love to, Karley, if you want to start the dialogue, it'd be great.
Yeah, sure. I know I'll be brief here since I know we're close on time. Look, if you have one person overly driving, you've already failed at the premise of the partnership. I mean, it has to be a team of teams is the concept I like to think about, where you're bringing complementary strengths to the table, but united around the same vision. And it's worth spending time exploring that in the early stages of a partnership before you jump right into execution around one project. And we have some incredible projects in the works with Stanford and the AIMI group, where we lean deeply on the clinical plus the physics plus the domain expertise in pushing that boundary of science. But we bring to bear the decades, in some cases centuries, of industry introduction around the regulatory clearance, around bringing something actually to product. And that type of partnership really helps us fly fast.
Yeah, totally. I totally agree. I just wanted to jump in there because Karley is absolutely right. It has to be a multifaceted approach. The work that we're doing with the Innovation Hub, we really focus on having, before we even start to say, hey, we're going to start this paperwork to go down this line, we have a conversation about the types of projects that we potentially want to do. Then we reach out within our system, our health system, to see if people are actually interested in this or not. And not just clinicians, but we reach out to our administrative staff, to our support staff on the floor, to our researchers as well. And if there is interest, then we proceed. If there's not interest, then that kind of halts the whole process at the beginning. And so it is all hands on deck, more of a flattened hierarchy than like a one person driving that. And that's how we've found success.
Mm-hmm.
In academic industry partnerships, we do it at various levels of resolution, I would say. At the level of an individual researcher, it is quite possible between IBM research and academic collaborations, and that's the sort of things we have already done with AIMI centers. But we also fund large-scale efforts, like the Human-Centered AI Institute at Stanford was a multi-year collaboration. We just announced the Cleveland Clinic partnership. So we pick a set of topics that would be important to decide for future direction, particularly in AI and quantum and so on. And then we put a dedicated team of researchers on both sides together. So one of the points that Karley made is true, that it has to be a team of people to drive an agenda as such. So there are many such examples, I think, across major industry organizations that have teamed up with many academic institutions. So I just named the Cleveland Clinic. There's also the MIT Watson AI Lab partnership, or the University of Oxford collaboration, and so on. And these are good ways of jump starting and spearheading new fields through joint partnerships.
Yeah, just add one thing is these are long-term things. They last decades. You know, Microsoft, Fei Li was a Microsoft faculty fellow in 2006, just when she was thinking about ImageNet. And, you know, here we are today, you know, really excited working with AIMI. And so I think, you know, these are long-term relationships, and university timescales are decadal or multiple centuries, like in Cambridge, where it's 800 years. And so I think, you know, this is really a long-term relationship. Yeah. So, you know, I think that's really important, just that aspect of it.
I've been given the signal that we're out of time, but I'm sure we could all carry on this conversation for hours and hours. But just want to thank everybody on the panel for joining. It's great to see how the conversation has shifted over the past few years. This sector is maturing, and it feels like we are really on the cusp of getting AI, you know, routinely into clinical deployment beyond just the very early adopters and scientific research. So thank you all for your time. Thank you everyone for watching, and take care.